You may remember a while ago in my video discussing Earthbound 64 that I said I wasn't a big fan of RPGs. Well, I'm happy to report that I revoked that statement, along with the fact that I said that I didn't like Majora's Mask. I have no idea what I was thinking. I replayed it and it's fantastic. Instead, I'd like to inform you that I am a big fan of RPGs. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, Earthbound, Bravely Default, the list goes on, and I enjoy them all. I don't know why, but after starting Beta64, I've come to like all types of games that I hadn't previously enjoyed. Speaking of which, thank you again everyone for introducing me to Banjo-Kazooie. With Yooka-Laylee now coming out, I mean, it blows my mind. This is an amazing time that we live in the video game realm. Games like Hat in Time, Mighty No. 9, old games being renewed. It's just crazy. But enough with all these games. Let's talk about Earthbound. I decided to make this video because I recently purchased the game from a local game store. And after playing it through my newfound love of RPGs, I couldn't help but drop the current video I was working on and start anew with a game that's about crazy cults, violent bugs, and fighting large piles of barf. And no, I'm not doing another video on Conker's Bad Fur Day. Instead, I'm going to be discussing the beta of Earthbound. Earthbound, or Mother 2 if you're from Japan, was developed over a 5-year period by HAL Laboratory and the company Ape, later called Creatures. The game was designed by Shigesato Itoi, in charge of all 3 games in the Mother series, and produced by Satoru Iwata, who you likely know as the president and CEO of Nintendo. The development team of Earthbound was different than the original who worked on Mother for the Famicom. It was comprised mostly of unmarried men who were willing to work long hours through the night. Despite this though, development of Earthbound took much longer than expected and was repeatedly under the threat of cancellation. When Iwata joined the team, things began to work more smoothly. While HAL programmed most of the game, Ape worked on specific aspects, such as maps and text. Among some of the removed ideas, Itoi originally considered space travel to be the main focus of the game. 4 months later, Itoi found it too cliché and decided to have the game take place on a single planet, as it is in the final game. During development, Itoi would explain his ideas to the team in order to facilitate new ideas that weren't normal to video games. He actually referred to this as reckless wildness, and it showed. Dialogue between characters are intentionally goofy, and many of these characters were actually designed after real people in Japan. The desert miners, for example, were created to portray specific executives from a Japanese construction company. Also, remember those strange backgrounds that moved during battles? Itoi referred to them as video drugs, and all 200 or so of them were created by one single guy, whose sole job was to create these backgrounds for 2 years. The rolling HP counter in Earthbound is an interesting gameplay mechanic that isn't really seen in a lot of other RPGs. After getting hit, I always frantically press the A button to finish the battle before losing my health points. It's quite an interesting idea. But before there was a rolling counter, there was pachinko. In case you don't know what pachinko is, it's an arcade-type machine used for gambling in Japan. And as Gaijin Goomba puts it, it's the greatest game in the history of ever. Originally, when the player was hit, pachinko balls representing health points would fall off the screen. It was eventually scrapped though because having over 1,000 pachinko balls on screen would be really hard to implement, and also a pain to count. Originally, Earthbound was created for an 8 megabit cartridge, but during development, it was changed to a 12 megabit and set to release January of 1993. This didn't happen though. Instead, the cart size was changed again, this time to 24 megabits, and was finally finished May of 1994, but released in Japan 3 months later on August 27th. During this time, the team played through the game themselves and made their own small changes. Roughly a year later, Mother 2 was released in North America under the title Earthbound. Around 1992, Itoi did a video interview, and with it, showed some prototype footage of Mother 2. So why don't we take a look and see what changed? First off, Ness has no backpack in the footage. Perhaps he was originally meant to keep in his pants, like Guybrush Threepwood.
Hang on, the quicksand is sucking all the cool stuff I found in that snake from my pants. Now there's an odd sensation.
At this point in the interview, you'll notice that Ness and his friends have no diagonal animations. Much like A Link to the Past, they simply use the down animation. Everyone's favorite pile of barf, Master Belch, appears to be blue in the video, and yet only appears as green and red in the final game. On the back of the box, it shows a depiction of Belch in clay form. And what's this? It seems he's blue, as he was originally intended to be. Next up, we have the On It Arcade. This room appears to be missing the pinball machine from the final version, as well as the stairs railing. It also seems that the room is a lot brighter in the prototype. In Scaraba, it looks like the developers hadn't finished implementing all of the merchants yet, as there are places for them, but only one is there. It also appears that the traffic jam may have been a bit different in the prototype. First off, there's only one guy standing outside of his car, instead of multiple people in the final version, and the cars around him are different as well. From the looks of it, Ness could easily walk around the traffic jam, instead of having to walk through the desert like in the final game. Was that the original plan? In the Dalam Palace, quite a few things changed. The phone guy is now a lady without a phone, and there are no presents in the room. The throne is also less ornate in the prototype, and Pooh's master is standing in front of the throne instead of beside it. The last few changes I noticed in the interview is when Paula calls for Jeff. You'll notice that the tools in the ground are missing, and so is the bench in the middle of the room. The biggest difference though is with Jeff. Notice, he is in a different bed than in the final game, and I have no idea why they changed that. Now let's begin discussing some of Earthbound's various unused sprites. Here are 5 unused ghost sprites found in the game's files. You might notice that the sprites of the Chosen 4 look roughly the same as their jumping sprites that were used at various points in the game, except for Pooh's jumping sprite, which actually goes unused because he never jumps. So perhaps these unused ghost sprites were put in the game just in case the characters would jump, which never happens at any point the character would have been a ghost. Now what about this last ghost sprite of the character Everdread? Well, there are 2 possibilities of what this could be used for. 1, he was meant to join your party at some point. Or 2, when he supposedly dies in Forsyth, he would have originally floated away as a ghost instead of simply walking away. On the subject of walking and jumping, these unused sprites of King show him climbing. Perhaps this means King was intended to accompany Ness throughout On It. Then again, maybe these sprites were simply made just in case King was ever going to climb anything. This was never implemented though, as putting King in your party via debug mode and climbing up a ladder still doesn't load the sprites. There are a ton of other unused sprites too. Here's one of Ness's mother sitting, which never appears in the final game. And speaking of sitting, here are 2 unused sprites of Ness and Paula sitting with their eyes closed. Since there's no equivalent of these sprites for Pooh or Jeff, it's likely that these were intended to be used before Paula called for Jeff. This sprite of Jackie talking from the side isn't used, even though it really should have. I mean, when you talk to him from the side, he just looks forward. It's quite rude, actually. Thomas Jefferson sprite, or Poncho sprite, or Pincho sprite. The guys who run the broken slot machine have an unused sprite of them cheering, obviously meant for when you win a prize. Now, pop quiz. Do you remember where this bird appears in Earthbound? Well, if you said anywhere, you're wrong. It never appeared in the final game. It suggested that this may have the same function as Sparrows in Mother 3 for the Game Boy Advance, which in that game teaches the player many gameplay tips. This sprite at the bus driver's head facing left, or right if you flip it, was never used, as the bus only stops facing east or west, not north or south. You probably know of Earthbound's predecessor, Mother, which was released in Japan for the Famicom. Well, this cash box that went unused in Earthbound closely resembles the 8-bit look of the original Mother. But what was it meant for? I'd like to think it was meant to be a donation box that Ness and his friends could put money into. as there's really no reason for them to retrieve Money in the Box since there's an ATM already readily available. Unless this was an original ATM. I don't know. On the subject of Mother, these unused capsules in Earthbound seem very similar to the capsules that hold Starman Jr. and Mother. So perhaps it was meant to serve the same function in Earthbound. Throughout the game, there are points when little icons appear on the screen, like an exclamation point. But for some odd reason, this question mark never appears throughout the game, though it is in the game's files. Mr. Saturns were also meant to have little icons with the words poo-poo in them. And I truly hope that you can understand what this text means without me explaining it. Now here's an unused icon of a beating heart. Romantic scene, anyone? Here's a sprite of an unused flag with a face that reminds me a ton of that darn enemy from Super Mario Bros. 2. I hated that thing. It's unknown where this flag would have been located at or what on earth that face means, and if it even means anything. Moving onwardly, there are quite a few unused sprites meant for the Lost Underworld, where Ness and his party appear incredibly small on screen. These sprites are of Ness giving his iconic sign, and the photographer who takes the picture. It's obvious that these were meant to be for points in the area where Ness and his friends would get their picture taken, but in the final Lost Underworld, there is no point that happens. Also going unused are these tiny sprites of Escargot Express's worker. While waiting on Earthbound's title screen, you are presented with a cool attract mode featuring Ness and his friends walking around during various points in the game. Well, it turns out there are some additional scenes that would have been used in the intro, and here they are. The first one has Ness and Paula wandering in the graveyard in Threed. This next scene shows Ness, Paula, and Jeff walking in Summers. Perhaps these two scenes were meant to be used with a longer attract music track that was shortened in the final version. There are two unused enemies present in the game's files. The first is called Crooked Cop, or literally from Japanese, Dirty Cop. It looks and acts just like Captain Strong, whom Ness fights in On It. Some say that this may have been an earlier version of the character. Another enemy who went unused is called Magic Butterfly. You may be thinking that name sounds familiar, and rightly so, good memory there. Magic Butterflies are present in the final game, and are used to relax Ness and his party members. While this enemy has no graphics or an attack, it can be assumed by the name that originally the butterflies that help you would also attack you. Or perhaps they were meant to attack Ness all along, I don't really know. Now let's look at some unused items. An item called Temporary Goods has a great unused description associated with it. It says that it's a key given to you by a maid who works at the Monotoli building. In the final game, after giving the maid the yogurt dispenser to make trout-flavored yogurt, the elevator at the top floor is automatically unlocked. But it appears that originally Electra would have given you a key to unlock the elevator yourself. This last unused item is called the Video Relaxant, or in Japanese, Video Drug. Using it does nothing, but it does have a description. It says, "What the hey is this?" And we still wonder what the hey it is today. With every video I make, my favorite part is discussing unused and early music. Remove audio tracks tell a lot about the original feel of the game, which parts were and weren't meant to be kept, and not only that, some of them are incredibly catchy. Luckily for us, Earthbound has quite a few early unused music track parts. As with most early video games, music was created into parts so they could easily be looped without taking up more space than needed. Because of this, Earthbound has some very interesting unused parts of music tracks that are already in the final game. Some show removed endings, loop points, and some are altogether completely different. Okay, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. Now, let's start with the beginning of Earthbound. Even before the game starts, you're presented with some static and a bit disturbing music track with a headline that says, "Gygus Strikes Back," or "The War Against Gygus," depending if you're playing Mother 2 or Earthbound. You may not notice it, but this beginning static audio is cut short. There's about 15 seconds that you don't hear. My theory is that there was no disturbing music track to begin with, and that the player was simply going to hear the static music the entire time. The reason I believe this is because the entire static music track on its own ends at the same time the final scene does. Here, take a look and a listen. Moving on, after the headline and the title screen comes the Attract mode, showing various points in Ness and his friend's adventure. There's a piece of unused audio that was originally meant for the music track in this mode. This removed audio part seems to be a different ending to the song, and only one place in the song fits it: the middle, roughly 30 seconds before the final track ends. So does that mean the Attract mode was originally meant to be shorter? Perhaps so. This next unused music track is actually still in its entirety. It seems to be based off the final cave theme, but is a lot creepier. Was it meant to replace the final cave theme, or is it simply a variation meant for a different area? Another unused music track is a non-looping, shorter version of Pokey's theme, with the sound of an engine. Likely this was intended to be used when Pokey steals Monotoli's helicopter. When listening to the soundstone without having completed it, a sound is played at the end to let the player know that part hasn't been collected yet. Well, it appears that this sound was originally intended to play at the end of the Soundstone's completed song, but is cut off in the final game. Here's where it originally should have been. What is it with Earthbound and being creepy? Human sacrifices, that freaking department store guy, and that horrible track that plays whenever something strange is going on. And what the heck is up with Moonside? And don't even get me started on the final boss. Well, I think it's time to add to that flame. Do you know of the level Deep Darkness? The music track in this area is very fitting for the name, but this track was originally much creepier. Listen and compare. So that's the beta of Earthbound. After playing the game, I was so excited to make this video. Earthbound is such an interesting game, made by such an interesting guy, which makes for an interesting development story. There's nothing quite like it. Well, except for Mother 3, but thanks to the official prototype translation of Mother and a fan translation of Mother 3, the Japanese illiterate can enjoy these series of games that are like no other. So this has been Beta64, with the Earthbound beta. Thanks for watching.
やっぱりね。
じゃあ結構今回はなんていうのかな、ゆったり楽に作れたという、そうでもなかったですね。
やっぱり何年あってもまだやれるっていう風になっちゃうからね、こういうものってそこが難しいですよね。
どっかで見極めて仕上げないと、
待ってる人が今忘れちゃいますからね。
実はもう何年もかかって作っちゃったわけですからね。
お恥ずかしい。
本当に楽しみにさせていただきたいと思います。糸井重里さんでした。ありがとうございました。
どうもありがとうございました。